Most talks tell you about a recent idea that the author is proud of. This talk will be very different. It's talking about a very old idea that I'm ashamed of because I was wrong about it. My name is Scott Shenker, and I'm going to tell you why I was wrong about quality of service, or QoS. Now, this is a 10-minute confession about a decade of mistakes. And most of those mistakes happened before many of you were born. So I'm going to have to give you the background about what the world looked like back then to explain why I believed what I did, and then I'll explain why that was wrong. This talk is guided by three principles. The first is you should atone for your sins. I made a mistake, so I'm here in front of the community trying to describe what I did wrong. You should share credit. So I should point out that the quality of service effort involved many people. There was a whole in-serve working group. I'm not even going to start to name names because I'll leave people out. But there are many people who were involved in all the ideas I will be describing here. But when it comes to blame, you should hog the blame. So this talk is about how I was wrong. I'm not speaking for anybody else in that regard. Now, what did I get wrong about quality of service? So let me just boil it down very cleanly. I and many others thought that general internet support for quality of service would be beneficial. I spent a decade investigating various quality of service mechanisms starting in the early 90s, but I was wrong. The internet is better off without general quality of service support. Things like setting up MPLS for special purposes, that's fine, but this general purpose quality of service support should not be part of the internet. That's what I was wrong about. So why did I believe in quality of service? There are really two reasons. First, there's a mathematical observation that provided a rigorous foundation for quality of service. And there was a belief about future workloads that quite bluntly was based on a misguided view of human nature. So let me talk about the mathematical observation, and this is going to be in three parts. The question really is, what should the network do when there are many flows competing for service? You can do best effort, which is you let everybody use the network all at once. Or you can have admission-controlled quality of service, where you turn some flows away. The answer of which one is right depends on the kind of application. Some applications are what we call elastic. They're the traditional data applications, downloading a file. And then there are real-time applications like a video call. And we think they're quite different. And so to model this difference mathematically, consider the application's utility as a function of the bandwidth it receives. So that's U, utility function of the bandwidth B. So the mathematical observation part two is that for elastic applications, the curvature of the utility is concave everywhere. And then it's trivial to prove that you're better off just letting all flows in. You never want to turn a flow away if you want to maximize the total utility. But the third observation is for real-time applications, their utility functions look something more like this. And the key here is the utility is convex around the origin. And if you have some flows that are down in that area, you want to turn them away so that you can get flows up in the higher portion of the utility curve. So that's a simple piece of mathematics. What does it tell us? If the workload contains a significant fraction of real-time applications, then network utility is maximized if the network turns some real-time flows away when it's overloaded. Now, there are weaker forms of quality of service, things like priorities, but the mathematics supports a strong form of quality of service, admission control. Now, what did I think the workload would look like? I believed real-time video applications were going to be the dominant internet use case. Now, that may seem stupid to you because, it's really predicting that I thought Zoom was going to happen 25 years earlier than it did. But my excuse is that this is before Napster or iPods or TiVo or Netflix. We lived in a content desert. The idea there would be movies galore that you could just download was the furthest from our imaginations. And we thought that the main way you'd be using video would be to talk to each other. So I was right about the video, but wrong about real time, which is the real crucial factor. And I will return to this. So assuming that it was going to be real-time video, what quality of service mechanisms were needed? And here you needed an RSVP-like reservation protocol where a connection would say, I need this much bandwidth, and the reservation protocol could say either we're going to give it to you or we can't. So you turn the flow away. Some kind of fair queuing like scheduling algorithm. And then, we weren't total idiots, that we understood that if a link was highly multiplexed, you didn't want to keep per flow state. So if it was highly multiplexed or over provisioned, we could use much simpler algorithms to make sure that we provided the quality of service. Now, there were lots of people arguing against quality of service at the time. Why did I not believe their counter arguments? First, some people argue that, well, these router algorithms are just too computationally intense. And these basic mechanisms now are widely deployed and have been for quite a while, so that it's clear that the industry knew how to implement these things at scale. Other people observed that actually the kinds of peering arrangements you would need and the money exchange was too economically complex for the ISPs. And that may be true. I thought the ISPs would get smarter when faced with a significant revenue stream, but we never found out whether that would be true. But the main objection was that many people thought that over-provisioning is enough. Just throw more bandwidth at it and people will be happy. But we were very far from over-provisioning then. In the early 90s, when this was happening, we had very little bandwidth. So I did not see how we could get to over-provisioning without quality of service, because there was a chicken and egg problem, that you couldn't have real-time video at the very low bandwidth we had available. You needed some kind of quality of service. And if real-time video wasn't going to work very well, then people weren't going to provision for it. So you needed quality of service for real-time video to work, and then maybe people would start deploying lots of bandwidth, and then maybe you wouldn't need it anymore. But for me, it seemed like a chicken and egg problem. But, as I said, this work was being done in the early 90s. By 1998, I started having serious doubts. The first doubt came when we did a piece of math. So when you look at the network of utility of the network with a bandwidth B, and there's a utility if you're using QoS and a utility if you're just using best effort. And if you have any of these real-time flows, the quality of service utility will be at least as great as best effort. So the question is, what's the bandwidth gap between quality of service and best effort? And what I mean by that is, how much more bandwidth would you have to add to your best effort network in order to give the same utility that you would get with a quality of service? So it's really measuring the benefit of putting in all this quality of service mechanism. And I thought that the benefit was going to be large, but it turns out when you do the math, in the common case with Poisson arrivals and so forth, the gap goes to zero very fast once the bandwidth you have is slightly greater than the load. Now, you could concoct some other things where there are power law dependencies where actually the gap grows, but in the common case, it shrinks very fast once you get enough bandwidth. Now, my nagging doubt remained, how do we get to the over-provisioned state? But what this math suggested is you don't need to be very over-provisioned. You do need to match the load, but you don't need much more than that. The second stage of doubt also occurred in about 1998 when Akamai was founded, and that's CDNs. And what happened is I was completely wrong about the workload. The dominant workload was downloading content and media, not real-time video. So my misunderstanding of human nature was that we prefer entertainment to human connection. So that was the dominant workload, was not real-time. It was this downloading content. And that workload did not need quality of service because CDNs, which position the content at the edge of the network, were an extremely effective way to improve the quality of delivery. And the final stage of doubt was the path to over-provisioning. CDNs made access bandwidth a critical factor in performance. Users could pay for higher access bandwidth and get direct benefits. They didn't have to wait for the middle of the network to be better provisioned. There wasn't a global issue about how over-provisioned you are. You pay for more access bandwidth, your movies get better. So bandwidth increased rapidly due to the demand for streaming content. So this rapidly moved the internet into an over-provisioned state. This is what answered my nagging doubt of the chicken and egg of how do we get to the over-provisioned state? And this is the answer. This tight feedback loop between I increase my access bandwidth and I get better service. So summarizing my many errors, what I didn't foresee was the real dominant application was streaming video, not real-time video, the effectiveness of CDNs, which solved the delivery problem, and the impact of edge speeds, which led to this over-provisioned internet. Now, I look back with some regret. I'm sorry I got this wrong. I've got an ego and I don't like to make mistakes, but I'm not sorry that I worked on quality of service. This quality of service effort, this research effort, created an alternate trajectory for the internet. It's a trajectory the market didn't take. It took a different path, and that's fine. But one thing that actually was very gratifying is that the process had a very clean separation of concerns. SIGCOMM, and other conferences, they asked the question, is this technology interesting? And by and large, we could publish papers on quality of service. The IETF, the ISPs, and the vendors, they all asked the question, should we deploy it? And eventually the answer was no. But there was a very clear separation of concerns here, which made the intellectual work rewarding, and then the commercial efforts could make a separate decision. So what lessons did I draw from this experience? One, our field should explore new ideas, even if their chances of adoption are small. Because we never know which ideas will flourish, due to the market. We're just not very good at predicting that. Nor can we always tell which ideas should flourish via policy. The internet is an idea that would not have flourished by the market, but was made to flourish by policy decisions about funding. We are starting to lose the separation of concerns between interesting and adoption. Our conferences often ask the question, how will this be adopted? And if they can't find a path, papers are often rejected. There used to be a much clearer separation. That separation is going away. And we focus much more on will flourish, meaning what will the market do, much less about what policy should do. Meaning there are some designs that should be adopted because it's better for society, but if market forces wouldn't take us there, we tend to ignore them. And we forget how radical the internet was. Would not be accepted today in SIGCOMM because we would say the phone carriers won't adopt this. So how will this happen? So the fact that ideas like this would not be accepted today is precisely the reason why we created NINES. Thank you for listening. Please send me your questions, comments, or rants. Thank you very much.